Welcome to the Lunge Lift podcast. Today we've got a special episode for you. It is our 3-year anniversary. So to
3
mark
years.
that, 3 years exactly, we are doing a special listener Q&A. So we've been collecting questions and expect to learn about tight hip flexors. We're going to talk about things that we've changed our mind on recently. We're going to improve your front rack. We're going to talk about building muscle and burning fat at the same time.
Don't want to burn those muscles.
Exactly. And a couple of other interesting topics. So stay tuned to get your question answered and hopefully pick up a few golden nuggets along the way. But before we get into it, as always, a big thank you to our show sponsors, thetrainingstimulus.com. Please check out the website if you'd like to get a guide to a beginner's understanding of movement mechanics. wit-fitness.com. Use our discount code LL15 to get 15% off your purchase. And Hydro, please use our discount code LL20 to get 20% off your blood flow restriction apparel. Rob, 3 years.
I know, mate.
Made it.
Don't know how. As I kind of alluded to last time, it's like the longest commitment I've had. So this is pretty special to me. So thank you, and thank you all listeners for being on board this journey for the last 3 years. Obviously, it started right before lockdown. We had those 3 episodes recorded in person, and we haven't done any more in person since. So, and to be fair, I don't even know how much I've seen you since actually in real life. Obviously, I've seen you a few times, but it's mental that someone you talk to every week. But it's been. I feel over the last 3 years, it's been really cool to just like brain dump and just like get all this information out there, because again, it's a passion I think for both of us to just talk about all this stuff. So, and how do you feel about it?
Yeah, same. I think it's been really enjoyable, and I think it's one of those things that we said before, like, so it compounds over time. It's awesome when somebody DMs and said, "Oh, I just listened to your episode on knee valgus,
like an old one,
basically 3 years ago."
Yeah,
And it made so much sense. So it's one of the beautiful things about technology is that your impact can be multiplied. So I think it's been really gratifying to be able to have these conversations with more people than I can meet in real life. And
I think that's the thing. I think the guest side of stuff, I think, has just been insane, because it's like you've been able to talk to all these different people from all around the world. Like, that's really cool. So we've been able to do that. And like, generally, what's the other alternative? Like, it'd be maybe like a DM on social media which disappears and nothing comes of that, where it's been really cool to maybe, or just to dive deeper into people's backgrounds and understand people more, and then create relationships from there. So it's been awesome. So thank you listeners. It's been a journey, and continuing to hopefully grow as we are. So I think let's kick off. Let's start off with this hip flexor question. I thought it was a really cool one, because tight hip flexors are extremely common, or what people think are tight hip flexors. So the first point of call would be, should you stretch it? So the question was, my hip flexor is always tight. Should I always stretch it? From Hugo.
So hi, Hugo, if you're listening. This is a common thought process, and I know Hugo, he basically has a chronically tight hip flexor, and he was recommended a stretching program by one of his mates. And his logic was just, like, hip flexor is always tight. This program has got lots of hip flexor stretching in it. Surely that's a good thing. I was like, well, how long has it been tight for? He's like, oh, years and years. He's like, is it stopped being tight? No, it still tightens up all the time. So, okay, well, let's just challenge that thinking then, and question, is your current strategy working? And the first thing to establish is it actually a problem? I always say it's not a problem unless it's a problem. So a little bit of tension through your hip flexor. Everyone's got tight corners and little things that their body tends to do when they do a high volume of sport or exercise. So if it's not really causing any major problems, then probably don't worry about it too much. But if it is, and it's starting to affect your performance or cause you a lot of pain, the way I like to approach things like this is, why is that hip flexor tight? We've got to ask the question, is what's actually causing it to tight? It doesn't just happen randomly. There's always a reason behind why it's tightening up. And the reason is always the body's trying to help you out somehow. So that tight hip flexor is offering you something. It's giving you a movement quality to help you do the things that you want to do. And it's probably just not an ideal way of doing it long term for high volumes of training. So what are the possible scenarios that could cause a hip flexor tightening up. There's a lot, but the simplest way to interpret tightness in a muscle is it's probably overworking because it's trying to provide some form of stability or control to the movements that you do. So I know he runs a lot. So what benefit could he be deriving from a tight hip flexor? Hip stability is one. So if his hip is unstable in other ways and other muscles are not great at stabilizing that hip, the hip flexor could pick up the slack and be getting super tight for that. So by stretching off that hip flexor, you're actually just leaving yourself with an unstable hip, which could actually lead to worse issues than just having a bit of hip flexor tightness. So we would want to do an investigation to understand if other areas of the hip and other muscles around the hip are not able to stabilize it effectively. And the long-term fix would be getting those muscles to produce some more stability, which gives the hip flexor an opportunity to relax, because it's not going to relax unless it's convinced that the job is being done elsewhere. So that's probably the number one reason a lot of people's hip flexors might tighten up, but there are tons of other reasons. It could be down as far as the foot, like the foot could be really unstable. The body is incredibly good at problem solving, so it will always find a strategy to get the job done. And this is why it's important to do a bit of root cause analysis to understand what purpose is that tightness serving before we just apply sort of generic, oh, it's tight, then stretch it advice, because that might give you some short-term relief. But if it's recurring, that will actually exacerbate the issue. Like if you keep stretching that hip flexor off, the body's only going to respond by giving you even more tension through that hip flexor, because in its current state, that's the only way it knows how to stabilize the hip. We have to teach it or remind it that it has other options to do so.
Yeah, I think the most important bit for me when I hear like that answer to it is I'm going to pull out the bit of, does it cause you an issue at the moment? Because we've been wired to think, okay, everything needs to be in perfect balance, in harmony, to be able to move perfectly and stuff like that. And unfortunately, training isn't going to be perfect a lot of the time, because we're putting our body into compromising positions to get stronger. So we're going to probably create unnecessary tension in places, and the body over time, especially it being a runner, that's such a high repetition like stress on the body, that because it's such a low, I think when you do it for such a long time, it doesn't really become an issue until suddenly it's just like, oh, okay, now I'm quite tight. But like when you said there, does that cause you an issue? Is it affecting your running? Do you feel bad? Is it just you feel a little bit shitty when you wake up? You just need to kind of open up a little bit, walk around, and it kind of loosens off. Because I know, for instance, every morning when I'm waking up at the moment, my knees are sore as fuck, and my shoulders and my elbows. That's the thing. I know the demand from weightlifting. I've given myself such a short time frame to like expose my body back to weightlifting, essentially 3 to 5 times a week. So by then, if I just was dwelling on the fact that my knees were sore, my shoulders were sore, my elbows were sore, I'd be like, well, I can't do weightlifting. I was like, well, no, give it a moment to essentially your body to adapt to being awake. You've gone from being static to then moving. So of course it's going to be a bit creaky. And the thing is as well, when we're training, our bodies most likely aren't going to feel optimal all the time.
Yeah.
Because we are asking the demand for essentially progression, for growth. And that's going to be a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, we're putting stress on the body, so some level of discomfort is required. Like you have to get out of your comfort zone to drive an adaptation to progress. So, like we don't want to sort of normalize extreme acute pain. Yeah, we don't want to make everyone think it's okay to have a broken leg and just walk around. But there is a large degree of personal tolerance. Like some people just can put up with feeling probably too much pain and not do anything about it. But other people think that every little tweak or every little sensation, like a 2 out of 10 pain after a massive session, they think that they're broken. And the truth, as usual, is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Just while we're on this, there's one other common hip flexor issue. Probably not Hugo, because I know he doesn't do toes to bar, but hip flexors quite often get super tight in toes to bar for people who don't use their abs and lats effectively. And if we think of, is that you? Yeah.
Yeah, so that was me. Yeah.
There are 3 prime movers in a toes to bar: your abs, your lats, and your hip flexors would be the primary three muscles that get the job done. And between the three of them, they need to get your toes to touch the bar. So if your abs and your lats aren't doing very much, or even just one of them isn't doing very much, the hip flexors are in a position to pick up the slack. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like in a mixed modal workout, you want to have options to shift the workload around. So actually being able to bias each of the three is a great skill to have in the locker. But if you always get super tight hip flexors after doing toes to bar, I would want to do an investigation as to how effectively you can crunch from your abs and how effectively you can extend the shoulders using the lats, because there's a high likelihood that you're not doing it very effectively if that's always the case.
Nice. So let's move on to this next one, because again, it's a kind of movement specific one where the listener said that prone angels, are they a good exercise for overhead position? Now, when I think of prone angels, I think of just general movement prep, quite just out there, just getting the shoulder to move. Just like if you were to do like, arm circles or something like that, standing arm circles or arm swings, like that can feel quite nice, and it can feel like quite freeing, because again, it's like what I just mentioned there about getting out of bed, and then being all creaky. It's getting the body moving, get that synovial fluid going, get your shoulders feeling a little bit more mobile. But how much more mobile are they actually, or is it just you've got a little bit more freedom of movement? So let's break that down a little bit more.
Sure. So prone angels, if you're not familiar with the exercise, you're basically lying face down on the floor and kind of doing a snow angel movement, bringing your hands from your hips to overhead and back down, trying to keep them off the floor as much as you can. And they're quite prevalent in a lot of gym circles. And I think they are okay. It's the short story.
I love how you're trying to be right on the fence there. Just be honest. Okay. You're not a fan.
I never prescribed them, to be honest. No. And the reason is I'm much more a fan of reactive positional and stability drills. Yeah. So if we think about what we're doing there, we're trying to pull ourselves into a good overhead position using the muscles on the backside of the shoulder and using the floor as our guide, that is 180 degrees of shoulder flexion. And that's okay. But if we think about what we're trying to open up that position for, we're never really pulling the shoulder into that position using those muscles. We're usually pressing into those positions, or we're receiving a barbell there for something like a jerk. So what we actually want is much more reactive positional stability. And how do we achieve that? We basically want to take the shoulder into that position and let the muscles subconsciously react to stabilize the shoulder rather than consciously pull ourselves there, because the stability demand when you're pulling yourself predictably into a position, there's not really much reactive stabilization going on there. It's all concentric and conscious. Whereas if we, like, one of my favorites would be to do either like some sort of ring rollout, or I call it like a ring press, where you're holding the rings in a front rack position facing away from the rig, step and press to overhead. So basically the rings are pulling your hands behind you towards overhead. So they're encouraging that range, but you can almost relax into it, and then the required muscles will fire up automatically through the position rather than through mind-muscle connection. And this is similar to what our discussions about like bodybuilding versus performance training, in that mind-muscle connection is fine and has a great purpose. But if you're warming up your shoulders to do jerks or handstands or something like that, the subconscious reactive stability is far more useful. And you're actually going to drive more range of motion this way as well, because you get some assistance from gravity. Your body falling through the rings is going to open up that position far more than you can open it up concentrically by pulling your hands behind your head. And this is why like partner assisted stretching and stuff like that is so effective, because you can achieve greater ranges of motion than you could do by yourself by pulling yourself into those positions.
Yeah, so because when I think about like exercises that I've used over the years to improve, say, my range of motion, nearly have always been a form of exercise. So it'd be like, so for instance, using like pull-ups, so like kind of maybe like supinated pull-ups to kind of get myself into a nice big stretch, to hopefully help my front rack position. I know that, for instance, that's one of the things that we're doing with I'm doing with Chris at the moment with the weightlifting stuff. Is it's like my accessories are based more on improving range of motion rather than necessarily to get a bicep pump or a shoulder pump. So as an exercise, like I love that ring one, because it's like I know from when I've done that before, putting myself into that position, you just feel like you should be there, and you feel like it's getting an actual stretch rather than you, as you say, just passively like pulling yourself and just holding. So it's. I think when I think about these positions, I go back to the question before, and we say, okay, with that tightness, are these tightnesses actually causing you an issue? So, like with the prone angels, how immobile are you overhead? Is it actually you're just positioning yourself wrong? Use an example here. The other day when I was at Ronin with Chris, we were talking about my jerk, and I couldn't understand why. It's just been feeling ropey as fuck at the moment. And one of the main reasons I wasn't getting into my abs down position, like my rib cage down as I jerk. So I wasn't catching it. So I was catching it in an extended position, which then was twisting my hip, which then meant I had a soft landing rather than a reactive landing, like where I can lock into the bar. And as soon as I did that, because again, I was picturing that movement pattern. I don't necessarily have a problem with my overhead position, but when I say put my arms above my head, you might think, okay, you do have a little bit of restriction, but you put a bit of weight in there. There is no issue at all, and I don't have any issues overhead. So it's interesting, because then obviously that was actually a movement thing that then helped improve the range of motion, not necessarily just getting a stretch. It was just actually I had to move into a different position.
The only other thing I wanted to say on that one was there are certain situations where you do want to train the concentric shortening and the shortened position of muscles. One would be core compression. So if you're training stuff like L-sits, the ability to pull yourself into a very shortened state of the muscle does serve a purpose. So I'm not completely bashing on that as an idea, but I think overall we place too much emphasis on the concentric function of muscles rather than the eccentric function of muscles. And most muscle function in sport is reactive and eccentric. So we think of, in the gym, we think of like hamstrings as a knee flexor, but in running, you can argue that they're actually decelerating knee extension, and that's more what they do. So I think our training should reflect that more and have the emphasis on using muscles to decelerate into positions rather than just pulling ourselves into those positions. I think that's the way I'd describe it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. So let's move on to the next one. So we've got a question from Elon, not Musk, unfortunately, but Elon Brugman, I think, or Brugman.
A long-time listener.
Yeah. So thank you for listening. Some things you've changed your mind on. This is a cool one. This had to really make me think, because over the years of doing this podcast, again, we've had like back and forwards. Maybe it might be before we've pressed record or something like that. And I have had, actually that makes more sense. I haven't always wanted it to be quite an echo chamber, essentially. So I do like to have my own thoughts, but I know when we've gone back and forward about things, sometimes it's about finding that middle ground. So, and understanding where there might be value sometimes, and sometimes it's about not necessarily being optimal, and it's that middle bit. So, what's something that you've changed your mind
on? There's one thing I was reflecting on recently when I was at a commercial gym, and I saw a girl who's probably some sort of booty influencer doing a sumo, like RDL, and then a sumo squat. So she's alternating reps between the RDL and the squat. And I was thinking about that from a movement mechanics perspective. Obviously, that's what I do when I'm in the gym.
Not the booty perspective, but the movement mechanics. Exactly. I like it. I like it.
Pure professionalism. And I was just thinking, like the classic PT thought on movements like that is that they're terrible for hypertrophy or strength, because the weaker movement is going to limit the development of the stronger movement. But actually, from a movement mechanics perspective, a common issue I see with people and their squats is being far too forefoot dominant and quad dominant. Everything's like shifting forwards, and they're actually unable to use their posterior chain very effectively. So one of the problems I'm quite often solving for them is teaching them how to shift their mass backwards, basically have a more hingy squat. Like how can they bring in the glutes and the hamstrings into a squat pattern. And usually you'd be kind of dealing with them in component parts. So you'd be teaching a hinge pattern to use the posterior chain more effectively, and then you'd be teaching a more hingy squat after that. But I actually thought that would be a brilliant way to bring the skill in more subconsciously, because you're priming the nervous system to send the hips backwards in space, and then you're doing a squat immediately afterwards. So the body has that immediate recent memory of, this is how I load the heel, this is how I load the hamstrings and the glutes. And then you're sitting into a squat straight away. So like a weightlifting complex, if you put the skills next to each other, they're far more likely to spill into each other. So I wouldn't say I endorse all mixed movement sets now. Like, I'm not going to start programming lunge to curl for anybody, but I think there's definitely a useful application for that if you're trying to improve somebody's mechanics.
Nice. I think when I was having to think, like, one of the main things where I've kind of not changed my mind, but I am willing to be a little bit more submissive, and that's about the training biceps to improve your chin up. I'm like, I get it.
That has come up a few times, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I get where you come from, and I understand the mechanics of, like, and everything that we talk about. I understand. I just like to think, and I'm going to tell it to myself, that I need to be doing bicep curls to get better pull-ups, even though my pull-ups, my chin-ups still have not necessarily improved.
Yeah.
Maybe the why, but I'm gonna keep doing them, and no matter what. But that's because, again, it's not necessarily optimal, but it means I'm still going to train my biceps, and I'm still going to train my chin-ups. So
yeah, well, don't get me wrong. This, like, bicep curls, if you want to build your biceps, bicep curls are brilliant. And I actually had a real world experience of this last week, where on Friday, some of the guys that were doing some bicep curls, so I jumped in and did some, and I genuinely had a much harder time recruiting my lats when I was doing my pull-ups afterwards, because my body is just so tuned to be using biceps as the prime puller, that when I was then doing my pull-ups, I was very arm dominant, and normally my lats kick in very readily. So I think that just brought it home for me that, it isn't ideal pulling mechanics to just put everything through your biceps, but still curl away if that's what you want.
Yeah, and I will be. So, and then I know a point where I think we both had a bit of I've not necessarily a full mindset shift, but I've definitely liked the idea of being challenged about vegetables and if they're good for you. I've understood the case why people are maybe saying vegetables aren't necessarily good or they're not necessary. And obviously we've had Liam from PH Nutrition on, where we've taken a nice dive deep into this topic. So if you do want to listen to that, check that episode out. But for me, I think it just took away the stress side of things for me, thinking, right, okay, I need to get in 5 fruit, 5 veg type thing. Or I've taken away that level of stress of thinking, right, if I'm not getting this, it means I'm going to be breaking apart and breaking down. And maybe there might be a case for some. So what has it kind of made you think about?
Yeah, I think this was a massive one for me, actually, when I reflect on it, in that my whole life I had just been under the assumption that the more veg you ate, the better and the healthier you would be. And I think just sort of challenging that idea and looking into it more deeply, realizing that there are actually a lot of things that are not great for us in vegetables, and they're not all good. And challenging the idea of, what does the human body actually need, and where are those nutrients most prevalent? And the idea that those nutrients are more bioavailable in animal products, and they're all available in animal products, is, I think, quite profound for me. That just the idea that you can get everything you need from animal products. And I think, it's just one of those, not penny drop moments, but not far off, where you think, shit, it's everything I've been listening to this point a lie. And I don't think that's true. I think there's still a lot of goodness in plant foods, but it's been a massive paradigm shift for me to think, okay, what do I actually need? What are the vitamins and minerals that the human body requires to be healthy, and where actually are the best places to get them? And the idea that some plant foods can actually be, like, bad for you.
Yeah.
And I think we all kind of knew that anyway. Like people know that people have intolerances to different types of foods. The FODMAP diet's become very prevalent now. So it's definitely something I'm very interested in and want to learn more about. So yeah, I've definitely changed my mind from a perspective of basically trying to get as many veg in as I could per day to now more looking towards animal-based foods to get my vitamins and minerals.
Nice. I mean, for me, that's probably why your skin is looking so revitalized at the moment, and in fact, you've just come back from South Africa, and I'm looking withered. But it does make me wonder. I think where I think it's hard to really find a proper case is about consistency. Just like with anything, it's like if you're going to take them out of your diet, you have to do it for a long enough period of time and see if then you have a reliance or you have a deficient vitamin or mineral across your profile because you're not eating vegetables. And if you're still trying to hit them by having your more animal based products, then technically you should be okay. And then you should have then the blood work to reflect that. So it is a fascinating thing. And I think there's so many more. I think there's much more bigger fish to worry about for most people than just negating vegetables. Yes, okay, maybe the how you feel that can obviously impact massively, like your reaction towards things or your just like your attitude towards food. So you might be thinking you might have a really bad relationship with food because of the vegetables. But most of the time, I think people got so many bigger fish to fry here. So
Yeah, exactly. There's probably a very small percentage of people where the vegetable intake is really severely negatively impacting their health. But I think if you are having gastrointestinal issues and you eat very healthily, it's worth asking the question.
yeah.
And as we always say, like, don't guess with stuff like this. I'm going to be getting my bloods done again soon just to see how a lower vegetable diet has affected my levels.
How low has it been?
How low vegetable? I've barely bought a vegetable for any of my home cooked meals since like whenever a few weeks before that episode. But don't get me wrong, if I'm at my parents', my mum put some broccoli on my plate. I tried to refuse it once, but that didn't go down very well. So I have been having some vegetables here and there, but previously I would be like 5 to 8 portions a day. And now I'm 0 to 2, I would say. And more often than not 0. I am still eating fruit, which is a big caveat. So that they do obviously provide a lot of micronutrients. But the experiment goes on. I haven't died yet, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see your results. So let's pull it back into the how can I improve my front rack mobility in a front squat? This question, I think, is a real common one. Because again, I see it on social media lots. I see the question asked lots in people's Q&As and stuff like that. So it's something that people are still obviously very confused about. So let's give them a one-stop shop answer.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that this came through your anonymous question submission. There's no shame associated with having a poor front rack position. Let me just get that out there. It's a very common problem. It happens to a lot of people. So you don't need to be embarrassed that your front rack isn't great. As with a lot of things, the truth is that there are multiple possible causes. So there's lots of reasons why your front rack position might be not great. So the idea is to get a professional to look at it, to try and diagnose what's really going on. But we'll run through a few of the usual suspects and then some action steps you can take to try and sort it yourself. So the common restrictions that might lead to a poor front rack position would be rotation of the shoulder joint. So predominantly shoulder external rotation. So you imagine turning your thumb away from your body. A lot of people are very sticky there. And if you can't do that, you're not going to be able to rotate your elbows up in that front rack position. The other ones would be the ability to protract your shoulders. So basically push your shoulders forwards and round your upper back, which I think a lot of people find surprising, that a rounded upper back is actually a good thing when it comes to front rack. And the easiest way to visualize this, if you think about pulling your shoulders back and down, you're effectively removing the shelf that you want the bar to be sitting on. So you actually want to be reaching your elbows forwards as well as
Yeah.
up, so that you can sit the barbell nicely on the shoulders, not just on your throat. And other common causes might be very tight lats. They have to be very tight, and specifically in that transverse plane. So it comes back to the shoulder external rotation. So it's probably not just the lats, especially if you've got a decent overhead position. There's probably other muscles involved. So those are the sort of things that we're looking for commonly. But like I say, there are less common and less obvious causes. One of those might be your pelvis position. If your pelvis is very anteriorly tilted, think of that as using up slack in the system, which is going to make it harder to round your thoracic spine without really buckling forwards. So if you tuck your tailbone under, you might find you have a little bit more slack to play within your spine to free up that front rack position. But that pelvis position can itself be caused by other things. So you could have something going on in your feet or your hips that are causing that anterior tilt of the pelvis. So it's not as simple as just tuck your tailbone under. Sometimes we always need to look at the whole body to understand what that root cause might be. Other sort of less obvious ones, or maybe it is obvious for some people, but your previous habits or sports are a massive dictator of your ability to get front rack. The most common one I see is people who've played rugby, especially forwards, if you're a prop, especially, but yeah, hookers and locks as well, where you're scrummaging a lot. You're actually training your spine to be very stiff and your shoulders to be quite fixed in position. So they'll usually struggle with overhead as well. And that served a really important purpose when you're playing rugby, in that it protects your spine. You don't want your spine to be super mobile, otherwise it would crumple every time you engaged in a scrum. So it will take a little bit of time to basically teach your body that it's okay to move your spine a little bit more. It's okay to have a bit more of a flexible neck. Whereas, yeah, in a scrum, that's the last thing you want. So for those people, just taking your time, gentle encouragement of range of motion is definitely the way forwards. And that applies to everyone, really. You never want to force your body into a new position. You always want to encourage it, to show the nervous system that it's not a position of threat, that it's actually safe to go there. And that's the solution to long-term improvements in range of motion, rather than, cranking on something until something tears to permit you to go further. You're not going to have much strength or control in that position.
Yeah, it's funny because when I think back to some of the things that really accelerated my strength gain was the pelvic tuck. And just because of how much then it just enabled my upper back to move a bit more freely, which then meant even with the low bar squat. So for the deadlift, it helped hugely, like allowing my shoulders to be pulled forward into the position where I can then lock them in place and stand up with it, helped tenfold. When it comes to the low bar squat, because of the stress that it was putting on my essentially rear delts and shoulders, being in such a yanked back position to create the shelf across my upper back rather than my traps, I found by then getting my rib cage down, the load was slightly in front of me, but I felt a lot stronger in that position, because then as soon as I started the lowering phase, it felt like it was in place. So when I would tuck my hip, it would be tuck hip, brace, lower. So I was doing that as a sequence, a kind of like a all-in-one sequence, essentially. So then by the time I hit the bottom position, everything was aligned and was able to brace hard against it, which I'm still amazed at. Like when I look back at all my training videos for the last powerlifting competition, how very rarely did I go out of position. Like in my squat, it was just I lost it slightly. Where, for instance, I either just didn't have it, or actually, I don't think I failed a rep. So I think I always stopped just short. Like I was quite smart with certain things. I didn't go to failure because again, I was trying to build strength. Whereas in competition, again, I could have maybe gone up a little bit more than I did. But again, the risk reward, was that going to impact other things down the line? And obviously, my goal for the last competition was to max out my deadlift. But that pelvic tuck helped so much at giving me a little bit more front rack space. And then that's the same thing coming into weightlifting that I just mentioned earlier with the jerk. Being able to kind of have my pelvis tucked under, my rib cage down, so I'm a nice solid column. So when I drop under the bar, because you should be just going essentially up and straight down, that I'm then creating a nice solid structure for me to catch the bar in. And like the difference was massive. It's like I hit the other day, it was like 136 on the clean and jerk. And I've been failing. I hit 130 last week, and it wasn't easy. And don't get me wrong, it's still like under my best ever, but it's in like to hit 136 without a belt and to feel good. Like I felt like the belt actually then impeded my strength because then I wasn't able to actually create a proper brace. I was actually then pushing
Yep.
out rather than pulling down. So it's been really like that pelvic tuck thing. I think if you haven't given it a go, especially for like your front rack position that we've been alluding to here, it's massive because it's I think where we look at just a slight detail, like where we go and see like in magazines that the classic tuck backwards. So you get that extended lower backs, and you don't want to go below parallel, like the classic like fitness model style squat. That is changing, but is in just like that is still a narrative that is in so many people's heads, and I see it when I see new people coming to the gym and stuff. I'm just like, and they're still thinking like this is how to squat. I'm like, no, we've got plenty of room to work in, and then they realize they're like, fuck, my back doesn't hurt when I squat. I'm like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to fuck your back.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of practical ways to build that in, goblet squats are probably the easiest way to teach that pelvis position, because you can use the counterbalance and hold the goblet further out in front and play around with your pelvis angle. And also it's a great way to practice the reaching. Like if you want to reach your shoulders forwards, using the goblet to play with that and help shift around your center of balance, because obviously if the weight's further out in front, you're going to have to sit back a little bit further to stay even on your foot pressures.
Yeah.
And in terms of thoracic spine mobility, making sure to incorporate some side bending and some rotation, as well as the flexion extension. The T-spine is a really clever piece of kit in that it's like a gimbal. So
Yeah.
the motions all go together. And if you look at this, basically the back of the spine, it doesn't like pure extension. Like the teeth of the back of the spine all line up, is how I think about it. And actually with a little bit of rotation, you're going to get more access to extension. So when you're mobilizing the spine, incorporating side bending and rotation at the same time as doing your flexion extension work can quite often be a magic key to opening up new ranges of motion, rather than just forcing extension over a foam roller, which a lot of people do, which the spine, if I said earlier, we want to always encourage range, especially so with the spine, because the spinal cord is one of the most important parts of our body. So this is why we get back spasms. There's any threat to the spinal cord, the body goes into defense mode very quickly. So we never want to crank on that spine to try and force new range of motion. We always want to be quite gentle with it and encourage it rather than force it into new positions.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about maybe a way of like improving, because I know a lot of people like that stretch, for instance, just over a foam roller or over a wall ball. Like just off the top of my head, thinking you could essentially do it on a wall ball and reach up and diagonal across. So you're still getting that movement. So you're allowing the back to move over the wall ball still, but you're getting a reach across the spine, which is again what we were trying to obviously unlock, is that T spine. So rather than just going backwards and forwards or with a weight plate behind you and lowering your hips, which we've all done at some point. I know I've done it in classes and stuff like that. It is quite a common solution for what we think is going to be the solution, but we could improve it. So if you do still want to do your rolling around on a foam roller or on a wall ball, then maybe upgrade that movement by adding some other reaches, or take a dynamic and maybe go to some like reverse lunges with a reach backwards and across, or those type of things. So I know that's how I've incorporated in within my training is a reverse lunge with a reach over. Like for me, I get such a nice stretch. So if I'm stepping back with my right leg, my right arm would go up and across backwards towards the left side, and I just feel a massive stretch all through my spine, and I get a look back as well. So I open up and it just feels great. And just on that, the opening up, the looking back part, I think was really key, because I remember going way back when I was used to do my GHD sit-ups. And I remember you saying to me, look back with it, open up, because I was always restricting and causing too much stress by keeping my chin always tucked. As soon as I then opened up, I had all this extra range, and I felt better doing it, and I didn't get as much discomfort. So yeah, have a play. Right. So next question. Really like this one. And at the same time, I don't, because either one, you didn't listen to last episode, or I love it. So listen to that last episode. And the question is, can you build muscle and burn fat at the same time? So we took a deep dive on this in the last episode, and essentially, you probably can. But why would you try to do that? Because you're just trying to essentially cheat the system. Why not do one thing properly and then do the next thing properly, rather than trying to do a little bit of everything and just hope to get better?
Yeah, I agree. I think if the person asking the question wants to build muscle and burn fat, so they want to be bigger and leaner, you're probably going to get bigger to that big and lean state faster by doing one at a time than trying to do them both at the same time. So, as with a lot of things, it depends on who you are, your training history, your starting point, as to how feasible and sensible this is as an idea. But the reality is, you do see a lot of people who do both of these. They'll go through a 12-week transformation and be really strict on diet, increase their exercise. And if it's sensible on both fronts, they'll get their body scans done and they will put on muscle and they will lose body fat over that same time period. Whether that's happening at, whether they're burning fat and building muscle in the same nanosecond is probably not likely.
Yeah.
But we're talking about this one offline, and to build muscle requires an energy surplus. You need the fuel and the building blocks to lay down new tissue. To burn fat requires a calorie deficit. So nutritionally, you can't be doing both at the same time. So the reality is, over that 12-week blocks, there's going to be periods where you are in a surplus and periods when you're in a deficit. And this is some of the nuance that we talk about in our calorie fucking deficit episode with Liam way back in the archives, where maintenance calories are a bit of a misnomer, because on certain days, the same say it's 2,500 calories maintenance for somebody, and on one day that might be a surplus because they're not very active. On another day, it'll be a deficit because they're very active, and lots of other factors go into how many calories you're burning on a daily basis. But with that in mind, day to day, you could be putting down muscle or you could be burning fat. But I think from a practical point of view, we'll just circle back to, if you want to get bigger and leaner, do one then the other. And depending on where you're starting, will dictate which one should come first.
Yeah, I think as well, like, if you're doing you might as well do one than the other. You might often hear this as, right, I'm going to go into a gain phase and then I'm going to go and do a little mini cut or something like that. And that would just be to kind of like normally tidy up some maybe habits that have kind of gone a little bit rogue or something like that, and kind of maybe just burn a little bit of the extra body fat that you may have put on, especially because your deficit will probably be a little bit smaller. So you're just kind of doing a little bit of damage control along the way. So when you do decide to actually have a big proper cut, you're going to have less to hopefully lose. Now, I think where this question comes to life is where Ash was mentioning about your starting point and your end goal. Because if you're someone new to the gym, then you're going to be able to pretty much do anything. It's great. It's like, I think if people realize how good newbie gains were, they'd do so much more with them. But most of us went through our newbie gain phase and didn't realize. And we were just like really suboptimal training and everything. You're just like, fuck, just imagine if I actually did something proper, I'd be massive and I'd be fucking jacked. But when you then put that into perspective of someone that's, say, come in, that's just change into a different style of training, like going from, say, bodybuilding, doing a class like push pull leg split 3 times a week, to maybe come into it a little bit more of like a strength and hypertrophy style program, then you might actually lose some body fat and build some muscle at the end of your, say, 8 to 12 weeks, because it's been a novel stimulus for your body, because you've done different things. You maybe, instead of using a leg press, you've been doing some back squats or some front squats or some goblet squats, where you're asking more energy from the body to do the work, rather than a leg press where it's going to be absolutely amazing for building legs. So you're going to be building those quads, building the hamstrings, however you're targeting the leg press. And in that state, we want to think, okay, cool, what is our priority? So you might get some of those newbie gains again just by changing stimulus, if the new stimulus is conducive of muscle gain.
Yeah. I think that's it. Basically, all the normal rules apply in that creating a calorie deficit is required to lose fat, but how you create that calorie deficit through food or through exercise, if you've changed program like Rod suggests there, that you're now expending more energy, but you're still able to get a hypertrophic response. If your nutrition is well dialed in, you can still be putting down muscle. The challenge comes when you've got an older training age and maybe you're bigger and leaner already. The requirement of progressive overloads to challenge the muscle to grow even bigger and is tougher. So an experienced bodybuilder isn't going to be able to do that. Like if they're already very big, then the demands to inspire more hypertrophy are going to be tough to cope with if you're not eating enough food to be in a decent surplus.
Well, look at past show guest Joe Brighty coming on, right? He went from bodybuilding to then functional fitness. So technically that is a huge, exactly what I said there about a huge novel stimulus. But he was losing muscle because, again, he wasn't asking his body to build muscle. He was asking his body to move better, which then wasn't challenging, it wasn't requiring the body to build that muscle because it is more of a hindrance. So rather than actually, because being bigger in his case wasn't better. Now, where, for instance, if we start thinking about strength and actually building strength, can you be in a deficit and build strength? So someone spoke about building muscle and burning fat. So that is purely an aesthetic goal. So maybe if you have a bit of a performance output as well. I spoke to Liam, who should be coming on as well, and we're going to take a real deeper dive into this. And he said, like, you can obviously do it, but obviously where it's going to be really important is your peri-workout nutrition, because you're going to want to think, okay, maybe through the week on, say, 3 to 4 days, you're going to be in a little bit of a calorie surplus. And then in your other days, you're in a little bit of a deficit. So calorie cycling and having more nutrition around your workout windows to make sure your training is optimal. So then outside of that, maybe once the body's recovered and it's like, oh, I'm actually sweet, it can then say, oh, let me use up some of this fat. He's doing a little bit too much, or she's doing a little bit too much of that. Let me use some of this fat. So there is ways. But as I said, we're going to dive a lot deeper into this because there is a lot of nuance behind a lot of building muscle, burning fat, getting stronger, and like having the holy grail, essentially.
Spot on. I think that leads nicely into the next one, which was, can you still do cardio when building strength? Short answer, yes.
Yeah, I think it depends is a massive one, because I think what I learned from what I remember hearing from the Zone 2 episode is the importance of being high and low. So, for instance, when we're demanding the body we're putting it under stress, right? Obviously, building strength or building muscle, we normally have to put it under a high stress to be able to adapt to regrow. Where something like Zone 2 is a low stress situation where we're just asking the body to just move ever so slightly, create a little bit of a deficit, less stress on the nervous system, so we're able to recover from, if there is any need to recover from it. So for me, I know if I was, say, if I had the extra time and I'm trying to build strength for this competition, I might have been doing a lot more Zone 2 as kind of as my buffer to create a bit of a calorie deficit, rather than necessarily taking that deficit from food. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it depends how pure your strength goal is. Like if you're only worried about getting stronger, then you want to spend all of your resources on strength development. And basically, we've got to evaluate how much of an interference effect we get from any cardio that we add in.
Yeah.
As Rob said there, low intensity Zone 2 stuff is unlikely to take much away, and long term is going to have huge benefits to your recovery and work capacity as well. So it might actually enable you to do more strength training because your work capacity is that much higher. So you could get stronger faster. However, this is a very individual question as well.
Yeah.
Depending on how much you can tolerate, how much volume in a training week you can tolerate. If you're doing some high intensity, very demanding cardio, then that's more likely to interfere with your strength sessions, more likely to take resources away from your recovery from your strength training. So it is likely to slow or halt your progress depending on the dose. So we did a great podcast with Dr. Phil Price about hybrid
Yeah.
training, where he goes through a lot of the research on how you should manage competing or complementary goals for cardio and strength, and massively oversimplifying it, but keeping the tough stuff away from each other will give you the best chance of being more recovered. So if you're going to do some hard intervals, keeping them away from your hard strength sessions will mean you've got more energy to give to the session, so you can push your thresholds harder, but also you're more likely to be more recovered by the time the other one comes around and not tired out from doing another high intensity session, strength or cardio.
Yeah, and I think like where I mentioned there about when I'm trying to build strength, and then if I had time, I would have then added in some zone 2 to help me with all those extra benefits that Ash just mentioned about there. But because I didn't, I had to prioritize what is the goal. The goal is to get stronger at these particular movements, so that is my priority. So, like we spoke about in the last question, understanding the why behind what you're doing. So, what is it I'm trying to do? Why am I trying to do it? Do I need to? Am I doing cardio to burn calories, or am I doing cardio to improve recovery and work capacity? Like that is a big question. So then, if you're doing it for a calorie deficit, then okay, cool. Then maybe choose zone 2, or maybe get the deficit from food. Whereas if we're trying to improve our say work capacity and recovery, we might want to then say do our zone 2 stuff, and like Ash said there from the Phil Price episode, bring in our high intensity intervals away from those heavy strength days. So if I put that into a week, maybe Monday, Tuesday a bit more strength dominated, maybe Wednesday a zone 2 session, Thursday, Friday maybe I have a bit more of a volume approach, and I might have maybe some sprints or some high intensity stuff maybe at the end of maybe an upper body day, or on their own day on a Saturday. So like, and depends if again I can recover over one day. So that's where you have to ask yourself that question of, is cardio necessary? Because when I was preparing for my powerlifting competition, I did zero cardio, but then I felt, and I was the strongest I've ever been, but then I felt the most unfit I've ever been. But my goal was to be strong, not to be fit. So you have to, it's
Exactly.
it's that wanting to build muscle and burn fat, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's always a lot of nuances and caveats, and had you had more time to train and had you had less life obligations, the perfect week is hugely individual for one person versus another, and you can only work with what you've got. So get clear on the resources available to you. And I think, as we said in the previous episode, you want to continually be checking in on how well you're tracking against your goals, because if your strength goal is for a competition, are you getting stronger at the rate that you want? And if you're not, then maybe you need to trim down on other things that might be stealing some of your recovery points.
And worst case, talk to someone. That's not worst case. You should probably come to us. Talk to us. We'll happily help you. So if you are interested in this building muscle, burning fat, or getting fit while you're building strength, definitely talk to Ash or myself, and we'll be able to take a deeper dive in that. We've got this question, which is, I think, right up your street, mate, of someone's been doing movement mechanics, but there's been no change. How? I thought if you give someone an exercise, like that's it. That's going to fix them.
Yeah, well, it should. So I know the athlete involved here, and I also know who's prescribed them their exercises, and they're both good. So the list of possible reasons as to why you're not seeing any change from your movement mechanics exercises. The first port of call would be to check your form. So hopefully your coach has recorded you videos to show you how to do the movements and given you some personal cues, because everybody needs different things to focus on to perform the movement accurately. And the tiny details can make a huge difference. So just be very accurate with how you do the movement, because maybe it was working in session, but when you're doing it on your own, you're not feeling it quite the same, or it's not having the same effect. Definitely refer back to that video. The second one would be another form of checking your form, to send a video to your coach so they can check it over and see if anything is not quite right. You'd be amazed at the number of times somebody's like twisting the wrong way or leaning the wrong way or reaching in slightly the wrong direction. And quite often these movements are weird. So there's no intuitive way to do them, and your body is always going to try and do it in the easiest way possible. So it'll quite often force you to go, or it's going to resist going where the movement is trying to take you, because it's a position or a range of motion that is alien to you, and your body always likes to save energy, so it will try to avoid the sticky range of motion or joint motion that we're trying to build. If you've checked your form and it's good, the next thing I would look at is, have you outgrown the movements? So have you progressed through them? Like any exercise, you can outgrow a weight for a given movement, so it's no longer giving you a stimulus to adapt to. So you might need to progress the movement, and it's not always intuitive how you would progress the movement. We're getting stronger, it's pretty straightforward, just adding more weight, we know we're progressing the movement. But when it comes to movement mechanics, because we're working on different movement qualities, sometimes using less weight is actually the way to progress the movement, because the weight can be giving us stability. So say somebody's got a very poor stability and we're getting them to do a balance exercise, some form of split squat, and they're using a weight to help stabilize it or give them a counterbalance. For them, more weight makes the exercise easier. So actually, to progress it, we would want to remove the weight and ask them to do it closer to body weight or at body weight, so that their own body needs to provide the stability that that weight was giving. It might be we need to increase the range of motion or the demand in other ways as well. So that's the third possibility. And I think the other thing that happens with people as they've been doing their movements for a while is that they might have improved the movement quality that those movements served to work on. So something else is now the limiter. So I think of this as a process of ironing out the creases. Like, say somebody's had a whole litany of injuries, so there's a lot of things that they need to work on. You can't fix them all at the same time, and you might only discover some issues once something else is fixed. So say you've cleaned up some faulty or unideal mechanics through the foot, and they're now stable through the foot. That actually highlights that something's going on at the hip, which was previously masked by the weird movement mechanics in the foot. So it depends on the individual as to how many things need to be improved to get where they want to go. But this is quite often the process. So I would definitely advise, speaking to your coach, booking a follow-up appointment to see if hopefully your mechanics are changing. So the limiter should be changing over time. We don't want to be dealing with the same issue over and over again. But as we remove one weak link, something else in the chain has to be the new weak link. So getting clear on where the limiter to your performance or whatever's stopping you from being where you want to be is always an iterative process. It's not like the way you move today is the way you'll move forever. If you're working on your movement mechanics, you're looking to change the way you move. So I would ask this listener to go through those 4 steps, and hopefully they'll start to see more positive adaptation towards their goal.
Yeah, I feel when I think about those steps, step 3 and 4 for me, like when I've gone through my movement mechanics that either you prescribed me or I've looked at myself moving, I said, right, what needs to improve? I know, especially using external weights, has helped me with my stability. So that fit, and the way I like to try and picture in my head is that if, for instance, you've got 50-50 balance on both sides, but because of this imbalance, you're generally walking around, say, 60-40. As soon as you then get that dumbbell in your hand, you're now back to 50-50. So your balance is improved, rather than bringing up that 60-40 back to 50-50 through body weight, where you're learning that new stability movement pattern. Like, for me, that's the way it kind of really helped highlight why sometimes adding weight isn't the option. And I think on the last point, I really like the point where when you sort your foot, something else goes wrong. And I know, like, for when I sorted out how much my foot was, say, pronating, that then my hip started moving funny. And it was just like, because it just went up the chain. And it wasn't necessarily a problem because I wasn't able to then fix that. But the whole point is my hip's been moving in a certain plane because my foot was moving wrong. So the way I was moving originally isn't necessarily the best way, unless you're, say, looking to compete and this is something you're working on and you're in your in season. You don't really want to be changing movement mechanics that much, because your strength will potentially then, obviously, or your movement across the board may reduce, and then that may cause either injuries or just a reduction in performance. So you do have to be very careful about when you implement these strategies to improve your range of motion. So that's my thoughts. That's my 2 cents.
No, I think that's great advice. I think your compensations help you perform to your best. So we don't want to be taking them out. They help you to perform to your best today. That's why they exist. They're helping you perform as well as your body knows how. However, long term, that might be what's causing you pain or going to cause a performance plateau over the long term. So if we stop you using your strongest pattern today, your performance isn't going to be quite as good as it could be. However, the reason we would change that is because long term, the new pattern is going to be better. So the timing with which you make those interventions is important. And for really significant changes, if you're going to say, I'm trying to think of a good example, say you don't use your quads very well when you squat, so your quads are very weak. If we make you a more quad dominant squatter today, you're not going to be able to squat as much as you could when you were more hip dominant. But long term, when you bring those quads up and you have quads and glutes working well together, overall you're going to benefit. But going into a powerlifting comp with a new squat style where your quads haven't built up the tissue tolerance to deal with the weights and the volume that you've been doing in training, that's not a sensible idea. And there's a lot of caveats and nuances around that. Sometimes it's only a good thing, sometimes it's a pure bad thing. But just like Rob said there, having some consideration to when you make changes and how significant they are is really important.
Yeah, it's just funny because as soon as you said that, I instantly thought I'm a very posterior dominant athlete and I'm doing weightlifting, which is very anterior dominantly based on the weight I'm currently lifting. So it's like no wonder my body is struggling as much as it is.
Creaky knees, mate.
Yeah, creaky bloody knees. Right, this question, I love this one because I feel I've been kind of diving into it a little bit, taking a little bit of a break, and I do plan on sometime bringing it back, but now it's kind of a bit of a when do I bring it back? And that is thoughts on ice baths. It's been shown to limit bulking, but does that also reduce gains, given bulking is your body's response to improving the challenges you put into it through training? So this is from a long-time listener, Harry Seymour. We really appreciate the question, mate. I love this because there is some nuance behind it, and there's a lot of. I think I'm not going to be the best scientific literate person at this, but if you listen to someone like Andrew Huberman explain all these details, it's definitely worth understanding a bit more information about it there. But to put it simply, don't get in an ice bath straight after you've trained if you're trying to build muscle, because we want that inflammation response. We want that stress on the body. We don't want to be essentially reducing that stress. Otherwise, we're not going to be allowing ourselves to get stronger, because the whole point of getting stronger is to essentially break down and recover and build up.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not an expert in this, but I have listened to a few podcasts on it. So maybe that makes me an expert nowadays. But the rule of thumb that Andrew Huberman gives is wait 6 hours after training before you expose yourself to colds. And that's like an ice bath. Is that cold showers don't make a difference. So you can have a cold shower after training, that's fine. But if you're going to do an ice bath, wait 6 hours, or the benefits of training, the adaptations will get blunted, and those adaptations can be size or strength. So it is performance as well as aesthetic in terms of the effect. And the way I think about this is you want to let the stimulus soak in a little bit. You just put your body through stress, and that has an effect metabolically on your body, which is what drives the adaptations to get bigger or stronger. And ice mutes those. It downregulates the inflammation. It downregulates all those cellular processes which stimulate us to get bigger and stronger. So we don't want to do it straight after training. The caveat and the nuance on this one is that elite athletes like CrossFitters, we were talking about offline, will often jump into an ice bath straight after an event. And this is a very different use case in that they are doing multi-event competitions and they're looking to perform optimally on that day. So they're not trying to let those like the inflammation stimulus sink in to get fitter, they are not training. They're trying to just get as much out of their body as possible in that moment. So for them, it is about recovering as fast as possible. They're not worried about taking gains away from event 1 of the CrossFit Games. They just want to be as fresh as possible for the upcoming events. So this is one of the big nuances that we talk about in one of our really early episodes of training versus competing. That the approaches can be polar opposite.
Yeah, and that's just making sure you're then very clear on why you're doing what you're doing. Don't just jump on a fad because it's what everyone's doing. And like, I jumped into the ice bath thing or the cold tub thing purely because I saw everyone else doing it. I was like, do you know what? I would love to actually give this a proper go and see. And I did it. I did it for a period of time. And I was like, okay, cool. I was in the timings I was doing it. I was like coming home from work at say like 9 p.m, getting in at like 9:30, and then got to go straight to bed. It didn't feel conducive to me. I was like, it's probably me just bitching out, to be honest with you. And then doing it first thing in the morning, I'm like, fuck that. I literally just woken up at like 4:30, going outside and sitting in. I just like, no. Just like,
did you take anything away from it, mate? What were your?
I did. So I did. I know the reason I will go back to it is because I really enjoyed the moment of peace that you have, because you've only got the one thing to focus on, and that is fuck, it's cold. And then you're focusing on your breathing and you're trying to essentially become present. And for me, it was that form of meditation which really started to benefit me beyond the necessary cold exposure benefits. I felt really good because I'd be sitting there at night. So even when I was doing it, like say like 9:30 at night, I just look up at the sky, and because where I live is a little bit more on the outskirts, and you just look at the stars and shit, and you're just like, sounds a bit woo and stuff, but you're just like, it does make you feel really small and shit. You just like, and realize how much shit doesn't matter, and we worry about so much just bollocks. So you're just like, how about just it gave me a really nice perspective on things. And it's like, whereas when I did a cold shower, I didn't feel the same, because it was just more like, okay, embrace, and just like get through it. Whereas and like even when I was then controlling the breathing, it was like, well, it's not really that cold anymore. Whereas when I was in the tub or the barrel, I'd be moving my feet, I'd be moving my hands to create that movement of water to make it colder. And it made me feel like I was growing a pair. Which is quite good. So.
Ironic.
Yeah, which is then why I've dropped off and not doing it, because I lost that pair. But yeah, so I mean, I really do recommend it. I mean, it's a good little experiment just to put yourself through. It's an expensive one if you're going to go legit and buy like legit icing. I bought a £35 whiskey barrel. It was not ideal. Cut off the top, cleaned it out, filled it with water. Was it perfect? No, but it done what I needed to at the time being. And I was like, cool, okay, do I want to purchase a better one? Maybe. So I've now done that experiment at a very low cost. So
nice. All right, should we leave it there, mate? We're a bit out of time.
Yeah. So guys, thank you very much for the past 3 years. And if you're just tuning into the podcast now, we really appreciate you sticking around. If you do stick around, we hope you do, because we hope we're providing valuable information that you're like, fuck, these guys know what they're talking about. So we hope we'll be able to insight and impart wisdom to help you guys improve your training, fitness, and lifestyle. But as always, if you do want to support the podcast, you can head over to YouTube. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just search Lunge and Lift. You can head over to Instagram, follow us there at lunge.lift. And if you do have any questions, or you want a question like this answered on the podcast, and maybe you feel it's a whole podcast episode, then send us a question, because we can then obviously take that question into a bit more of a broader term and help more than just yourself, and then help others at the same time. Because if you're feeling something or something's going on, someone else is probably feeling the exact same thing. So, and if you have any suggestions on podcasts you want us to do, whether it's not a question, but you think, or guests you want us to bring on, just drop us a message, one of us, either Ash or myself, or the Lunge and Lift, and we'll try and get that sorted. So, as always, thank you very much for tuning in. We really appreciate you, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.